Welcome to the Building Sustainability Podcast with me, Jeffrey Hart. Every fortnight, join me as I talk to designers, builders, makers, dreamers, and doers. Together, we can explore the wide world of sustainability in the built environment by talking to wonderful people who are doing excellent things. All right, here we are. This is episode 103. This episode's guest is Helen Gordon, who is creative director and co-founder of Kite Creative. So I first came across a post from Helen which was talking about her recent project, and I was really impressed with the breadth and the depth of the thinking that was going into all of the material choices. And we're going to discuss that project and a whole lot more in this really inspiring conversation. I should say at this point that this episode is chocked full of mentions of things that you might want more information on. And so there is a whole host of links in the show notes for this episode. Also, if you'd like to see images of the cottage project we discuss and the Glastonbury bench, then they will be on the episode page of the Building Sustainability website. Before we get into the episode, time to tell you about Through the Looking Glass, a future for historic windows. So you might have heard Marianne Sir on her episode of the podcast talking about windows and how this is going to be a big conference. This is it. The blurb says, the push to insulate our homes due to rising cost of energy, but also the challenge of climate change, is rightly pointing a spotlight on drafty sashes and casements. This 2-day conference and evening gathering, supported by SPAB, brings together experts in the history, repair and retrofit of historic windows and the design and manufacture of new joinery. It will be of interest to anyone who would like to join the debate and understand more. So if that sounds like your thing, maybe you work in the heritage sector, check out the link in the show notes. In other news, there are no new patrons this week, but good news in that if all has gone well, I'll have caught up with sending out all of the spoon level rewards. That is for anyone who supports the podcast for £5 or more, and they get a hand-carved wooden spoon from me. So if you haven't received yours, then do get in touch, because sometimes they get missed. And I certainly don't want you eating with a metal spoon. If you would like to support this podcast, and it is an independently produced podcast by me, it takes a long time, and I'll be honest, it's quite a lot of hard work, then I would be so grateful. I did work out my hourly rate for the work I do producing this, and yeah, it's a fair way below minimum wage. So if you get something from this podcast, then please do consider supporting. You can do so at patreon.com/building sustainability. But equally, if you can't afford it, then absolutely enjoy this for free. Just a quick update on the Netcombe Craft School. We will be on site building our workshop on the 1st of August. And we are using delightful coppice chestnut poles. And there's other projects up there to build a compost loo and generally get the infrastructure in place. We're hoping that by the end of the summer we can host a few spoon carving socials and be gearing up for loads of courses to run next year. I am so excited for this, and I can't wait to share those courses with you when we know what they are. All right, that is it for me. If this is your first time listening, consider hitting the subscribe button and go back and listen to the 102 other episodes. But otherwise, here is Helen Gordon in conversation. Enjoy.
We're nearly entering our 10th year of business now, and we have been predominantly until COVID doing a lot of design and build refurbishment jobs on period houses. We were predominantly working a lot where we were offering a turnkey solution for builders, where we'd be working from reconfiguring interiors, putting lots more en suites in, thinking about the needs of the person when we were doing that, but very much sort of thinking in terms of the budget, obviously, that the client had, but offering high-end builds for young professionals, from anything from, full through the interiors where we'd be supplying, down to wine glasses so that they could move in. But as we were never really sort of very always conscious about sustainability, and the clients that we were working with never really had that in mind. So we were sort of getting to the point where we were also working with domestic clients on more sort of their own houses, high-end sort of interiors, this kind of thing. But it was never something that people were thinking about. And then COVID struck, and we just sort of had time to breathe a bit. It was a very difficult time as well, because we had jobs that we were doing for domestic, actually residential clients, that went on hold. And I just started going down a minefield, really, into looking into what does carbon mean? What is, what does it all mean? And just decided that we just had to change where we were going with our business, and work on more sustainable things going forward, because we're, on our jobs, we were like contributing to about 8 to 10 skips per job. We were doing around 65 refurbishing all during that time, and it contributed to about 840 tons of waste,
Wow.
So you've got to really think about, what you're doing when you've got all these skips going back and forth and waste. So we decided to go back to our roots almost and work more on just the interior side, not just the build side, the whole build side, because my co-founder started off as a wood turner, actually, in craft way back. And we got very much interested in the circular economy, which I think we might talk about a bit later as well, and how you almost need to own the whole space in order for it to work. So we set up a workshop where we have the design plus the workshop, and we're looking more at interior solutions for builds instead now. And that's where we're going.
Great.
Going forward, building sustainable kitchens, lots of different things like that.
It sounds like you've had a shift in core values. How would you describe your core values now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be truly honest, I think that's the only way to get somewhere as a business, because you're only ever sort of putting a sticking plaster over things. Otherwise, we've become a purposeful business. I mean, we always were, but we've really thought almost inside out, what does that mean? And how do we translate that and tell our customer that? And it's sort of absolutely I don't really like the word sustainability, and I think that's something we might cover as well, but it's almost that, and nature becomes centre to what we do. And we've always cared, as I mentioned earlier, even though perhaps our client wasn't thinking about who lived in the space, we always were. And so we've really thought about, well, it's about the well-being of the person in the space that we're providing for, but it's also this bigger picture of the planet. So really our purpose now comes back to what the well-being of purpose and planet, because without each other, I don't think we can continue for much longer. And our well-being comes down to, nature in so many ways. So we've got to interlink a bit more and think about how we go forward. So our message comes from that now, and that's, everything is aligned to that.
Yes. There's no point having a beautiful, caring home space when the rest of the world's on fire and in ecological disaster.
Yeah, and we're just chucking up buildings, not thinking about all the biodiversity that may be there now, and, oh, well, never mind, it's a nice house, and, not having any windows in it, so the people then are sort of going a bit mad because they can't see light or nature or anything out of them. It's all, we have to think about all of it.
Has it been difficult to sort of change your clients, I guess? Because you've stated that you'd only take on sustainable or regenerative projects, but then, has it been difficult to find those clients that had that mindset?
Yes, I mean, it's sort of, and there is a little bit of a compromise. So, for example, some people have come to us because we're local or our reputation, and that is part of it as well. It's about having a resilient local sort of people that economy again, and working with those people and building something rather than sort of not thinking about that anymore. So it's been, but I think that's why it's important to get your message right first of all, because it's not necessarily about, it could be, say, might get less leads, but those leads are completely aligned with you and where you want to go. So you're creating more impact rather than 10 or 15 leads that make you unhappy. You're constantly doing things that you don't want to do. So yes, we've taken a big, our turnover has gone down, but we are sort of starting to find that people are now coming more to us and being attracted to us because of what we do. I mean, not luckily, but thank goodness, things are, seem to be, it's still a bit slow, but things are going in the right direction. So we are starting to attract more like-minded people now. But as I said, for example, this project that we worked on in Oxfordshire, which was about the local valued sort of quality, people that we are in business. He also, interestingly, then did have a little bit of a sustainability mindset. So there was different things that he was open to working with then in his house. So we worked on a thatch cottage that, from him living there, he wasn't living in a new build. He was living in this very old house, where he was sort of thinking, okay, well, I want some of this to stay. I don't want to obviously modernize this, but the space was old and pokey and small, and it wasn't very communal. He's got 3 children, and he needed it to he wanted to spend more time in it. He found that he wasn't spending much time in it. It needed to be updated. So we were brought in to sort of completely reconfigure that space. But as we were going through it, we were then sort of gently saying, well, have you thought, because he wanted a new kitchen in it as well, have you thought about the materials that we use for that kitchen and how perhaps they could be a bit more sustainable? There's a lot of polluting materials that are used as well in builds. And, have you thought about using these? And he's very much open to whatever suggestions we made, going, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'll do that. So, for example, we used a more breathable plaster on the walls because that's better for the walls to breathe in the future because it's old lime walls. We used, again, the paints on top of that, low VOCs, which are natural paints. Edward Bulmer, for example, he's a very natural, great manufacturer. And then our actual kitchens ourselves, we're building, we're using glueless construction in them so that we're thinking about repurposing in the future. And, we found these old barn doors in Oxfordshire that had come from another job in Oxfordshire and said, what do you think of these? Because he'd said he wanted some kind of wood to, be used throughout to mirror the old beams and that kind of thing in the house. And he's got lots of sort of old bits of wood. And so we found these beautiful doors, absolutely stunning. And so, well, we could make countertops out of these. We could do shelves. We could make a dining table. We could do all kinds of things, which he said, great, yes, let's do this. So we've sort of reused and recycled bits of timber that may well have just stayed doing nothing for years into something beautiful and created legacy products, put the value of his house up as well with what we've done. So, little examples like that. Used brass fittings for lights because you can recycle brass in the future. Just really, he wanted a new sofa, for example, on the interior side of things as well. Rather than buying a new one, educating about what goes into the sofa, using a local upholsterer with natural, things for inside it to reupholster it, rather than horrible bits of foam that give off nasty chemicals. So he's got this beautiful old French vintage sofa now. Lovely. in his home. Yeah,
and a thing that's built to last rather than a thing that's got a 10-year lifespan.
Exactly, and he can hand it on to his children or whatever he wants to do with it.
Yeah, Lovely. So you mentioned the big old doors. Where are you finding materials like that?
Well, this was a reclamation site, actually.
Oh, brilliant.
Some of the time, for example, on our past build jobs, we've kept, or on jobs now, we sort of are saying to the architect or whoever, can you keep the scaffolding boards and can you keep the floorboards, because we can reuse them for projects. They shouldn't just be sent away to landfill or burned.
Mm-hmm.
So this was found at a reclamation yard. But for example, we did a waste bench that was a commission for Glastonbury Festival, and this was built to sort of really sort of show how the beauty of using natural materials and how things that you think should be thrown away, actually why you can make them into beautiful things. So we made this, I don't know, it's been classed as something like out of Game of Thrones, but it's this big throne almost, that the idea was, because it was just after COVID, it was the first festival that they put back on. So it was about this idea of bringing people together on a bench to talk, and maybe they could talk about waste or be wasted. But,
both.
Yeah. But so it was, more than just having one person sat on a chair. It was about allowing 2 or 3 people to sit on there. Brilliant. And sort of have this space. And in the end, they were like, it then went to King's Cross for also something called Planted, which is a talks festival that happens there. And I've got pictures of children climbing over it, and sort of, it was very much, part of the space and used, which is what it was designed for, and a talking point. So,
brilliant.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. The Planted, that's Oliver Heath, isn't it?
Yes. I'm also on the Interiors Declare steering group with Oliver.
Great.
So, yeah. So
yes.
Go on.
Well, I just went to the most recent Planted. I forget where that was now. Somewhere
Stourhead.
Yes, the one.
Yeah, Wiltshire. Yeah.
Yes, very good. I'm a big fan of Oliver's work. I mean, all the biophilia stuff is, it's what I'm all about. So
absolutely, and that's part of what we do as well. And yeah, he's really making great strides in that area. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Brilliant. Pull you back slightly onto when you were writing about the cottage in Oxford. One of the things that really, it was kind of maybe even the reason I wanted to talk to you most. You said the phrase, you wanted to celebrate the imperfections of timber and use, bow tie fixings and things like that. That just makes my heart sing. That I think, to get away from that strive for perfect, clean cut, everything immaculate, and actually, celebrate the life that a product's had, or the, or how it was as a tree, or all of those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, originally, it's come from my fascination in Japanese, Far Eastern sort of craft, and, looked at the slow way that they've got this amazing sort of craft still going over there, the way they dye things, the way they just will take weeks to understand about doing one bit. And the idea of kintsugi, where you're celebrating the imperfection, say, of a ceramic, where you're putting there could be a cut, a break, and you're putting a gold leaf up it to sort of highlight, look, it's broken, but doesn't this look beautiful? And it sort of went from there, really, because and we just got like, why? We've got these beautiful things in it. Why then just sort of sand it and make it into a square? No, let's celebrate what's there. Let's work with it rather than changing it. And I think that's really important.
Brilliant. I love it. How do you choose? So this is a thing that I've been talking about quite a lot recently, which is if you sort of look at sustainability or regenerative, there are lots of different facets to what makes a thing, either good or bad. And some products or some materials can be very, very good in one area and very, very bad in another. Product I use quite a lot is foam glass, which is an insulation, great for going underground. It's recycled, but so, it ticks loads of boxes, but it is a very high carbon creation material. So how do you find that balance in, finding the best material when kind of everything loses out in some aspect?
I think it's a really tricky, hard time to do that at the moment, because there's a couple of platforms that have come out which so they have lots of criteria. For example, First Planet and 2050 materials. And particularly with First Planet, because I've had in-depth conversations with the woman that set this up, where, you're sort of ticking for carbon, you're ticking for, you're looking at the ethical side of it, where it's come from, the science behind it, the repurposability. But there's so many companies, you still don't know exactly what they're doing at the moment. So you almost have to judge it yourself in a lot of ways, or if there's something on those platforms, you can use those. So things that we do at the moment is almost, so it's looking if they've got an environmental product declaration, an EPD, and absolutely scrutinizing that to see how the product's been made, where it's come from. It's looking at the whole sort of credentials of the company as well, and trying to understand if they say they're cradle to cradle products. Great. It looks like they're trying to sort of think about the whole sort of carbon side of it, the whole materials, everything, because they're thinking about the reusability in the future. But yeah, it's sort of looking at sort of standards that are out there already and sort of trying to make a judgment, really, because I don't believe it's not just about carbon, it's about the toxins that are in something, because we spend 90% of our time indoors. So we should be thinking about what we're breathing in, how we're going to make our life better for ourselves as well, for example, with technology. So yeah, it's looking at a lot of criteria and trying to sort of balance it and understand, well, what's going to be best for our job. So it's, traceability, reusability, renewability. And also, for example, like when we're building our kitchens, so you start looking and taking apart everything, and even the glue that you're putting it together with, once it's contaminated that material, you can't then reuse the material. So is there a glue out there that's more bio? I mean, they're still inventing things at the moment. It could be 50%. It might not be 100, but it's also sort of saying, being honest about it. So, well, this is where we are on our journey. This is what we've done so far. These are the best that we can find. But hey, if you can find something better, let us know. But this is where we're at. Yes. And I think that's important.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're looking for all things BMX racing, you found the right podcast. Here at Lane 8 BMX Podcast, I'll speak to the local racer, the national racer, and even the Olympic level racer. I'm talking kids to the weekend warriors and much more. So get comfortable, turn up the volume, and remember to snap on green.
Sort of an honest evaluation of where things weren't as good as they could be, in the hope that they will be better.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You touched a little bit on the ethics there. So ethics of materials, sort of where they're coming from, whether, I guess, how they're being mined, what sort of labor and things like that. You told me a story about how you'd actually sort of encountered that the ethics in China in a previous job.
Yes, well, I used to be, and this is why this has also brought me to where we are in the business the past few years, is I was a retail buyer for 10 years, working for big companies like House of Fraser, as a homewares buyer. So I was buying things, anything from Christmas decorations through to tableware to garden, and having to go out to India, China, Taiwan, lots of places like that to source and product develop with factories out there. And it was always sort of the thing, to really understand your supply chain to go to these places. So, I was sort of always very mindful of, because we've always got quality things in place. We wouldn't just be working with anybody, but it was still really, when you go there, is the only when you really see what's going on, or, you know, and it's all fine, but it's not. So, for example, in a factory in China, you realise that those people are just working all year for us, making Christmas decorations, for example. And there's only 2 weeks of the year that they're not seeing their family. They're very much from all cultures from all over China. They don't look particularly happy, and they don't even celebrate Christmas like we do. I mean, lights go off in the dormitory at 9 o'clock at night, you know, and they're on this compound. That's their life, making all these consuming products for us that we bring over in containers, sell. We might chuck them away the next day. You know, seen rivers that have turned different colours because of the dyes that have been used. You know, just it, and, you know, and then when you're in India and you see the fragility of the supply chain, sort of going out from Delhi up to the industrial zone, and there's, you know, an accident and a horse and cart's being knocked over, and actually that horse and cart is bringing your stock down to the port to bring over in a container to the UK, and you go, oh, that's why it's late. It's literally because the horse and cart has blocked the road, and then they've got this massive clearing up job. I mean, it's so fragile, the supply chain still, you know, and we're just here demanding, consuming. We want it quicker, better, cheaper. Just can't carry on like that. So,
I almost said great then, but I meant great as in that's a lovely point rather than that's a great thing.
yes.
So transparent supply chains is a thing that is, I think you've talked about in terms of, you know, being a good thing. As you, someone who's looking to maybe buy a product or sort of use a service, how do you look into that transparent supply chain, and what's kind of a red flag for, you know, don't use these people?
Well, again, I think things are really advancing and need to advance further in this area as we go forward the next few years. But at the minute, for example, like, I'm not very keen on sort of mined product, because I'll look into, so say, a marble top or whatever, because these things will run out eventually. And you start looking into it. I mean, I'm almost my worst enemy by saying that, because I have a mobile phone, and some of the stuff we're not totally sure about how that's being mined at the moment. But I think it's just really, thinking about how something's been made, and the ultimate sort of thing really is to use waste or biomaterials that have been made from waste, or nothing to do with fossil fuels really, and that's the sort of way of doing it. So in the future, you know, they're looking at sort of bringing in things like material passports, where, you know, you'll be able to trace back where something's come from, and, you know, what it's made from, basically. And if you say want to sell it back in the future or do something with it, it'll have its you know, information held within it, almost within a sort of stamp, you know, like a barcode, which is amazing. And also life cycle analysis is something that is going to, I hope, become mandatory for products as well, where you know, a customer will be able to look at something and understand, okay, well, this has come from a mine in, I don't know, China, and, you know, and then it's sort of being brought across by container. You can see how much carbon's been used for it, and then what are the materials that it's then been joined with, and where's it been made in the UK, and how long is it going to last, and all this kind of thing. I think absolutely complete transparency then on the product, for the customer, because I think at the moment things have been taken away so much from the customer. They don't think where things come from. There needs to be this whole relearning exercise, which is why we wanted to have our workshop and showroom and design office all together, so that people can come and they can actually see people physically making the product, and it's not just arrived magically to them. They can see it's really being produced by someone locally here, and you're contributing towards the employee workforce by buying this product as well. I think there's been so much detachment to things we've got to reverse it and bring it back the other way.
Well, I suppose that the whole supply chain thing becomes easier the more localized these services are. You've spoken about local a few times. So how are you sort of developing that local?
Well, still early days at the moment. I mean, obviously, I think it's really hard to shift supply chains at the minute because a lot of stuff we don't make anymore here. We're more of a service-based economy in the UK. So there is sort of things like looking at, well, what crops can we regrow again? For example, I've been hearing, about hemp as a great crop that they're looking at. How can we bring this back into more areas in the UK now? Because that is a very good biomaterial, resilient material that we can use. So at the minute, we're still having to import in our wood and things like that. But again, then we're by using waste. So, for example, what we're looking at trying experiments with working with Bath Uni, for example, to invent our own waste material. So where, you say the wood shavings or whatever, looking at how we can reuse that in projects, designing out waste. So we've got a very precise cutting list using our CNC machines and then we'll use the bits that are left, not just burn them, but can we make products from them and sell them? So that's one way that we're using things more locally, but it's sort of also using local workforce. It's supporting other businesses locally as well. It's trying to build this sort of network and not being very much in silo. It's about collaboration as the way forward really now to build these strong, more resilient relationships. Yeah, because that's what we've sort of found. For example, the kitchen, again, I bring back to, we're building these kitchens, but what's the point of bringing sort of food in that's not being, organic or not thought about onto this beautiful, sustainable kitchen? It's about the local producers. It's about the local chefs. It's about bringing everything together really now, and almost trying to sort of relearn some of the things that we've perhaps forgotten about in the past.
Brilliant. So when we spoke before, you spoke about changes to the business structure, to the sort of conventional model. What's happening there?
Yeah, well, I think as we've already touched on with transparency, being ethical, people that work for businesses are looking for that. They're tired of this whole sort of growth, and this whole, it's just about profit. That's why we're in business. I don't think so many people just are not looking for that anymore. They don't want it. So this capitalist system just does not, it's not delivering anymore, is it? It's all about let's lower inflation, let's get GDP up. And I think there's a lot of people crying out for different ways of working, and there's sort of people more at the one end, maybe that are seen as more revolutionary, but things that I've been interested in, because things to start with like B Corp are a start where you're ticking lots of boxes and filling things in, going on quite a hard journey to become a B Corp, but you're then seen as more of an ethical sort of business that cares about social impact as well, and that's great, and that's something that we're on a journey to doing. But I think people ticking boxes for ESG, this kind of thing, that's great too. But in order to completely change, I think it needs to be this regenerative idea. And it comes back to local and sort of looking bioregionally at ideas and place. And there's a guy called John Fullerton who used to be the managing director for JP Morgan in America. He's seen as one of these revolutionary sort of guys as he talks about regenerative capitalism. And he's talking about this and how can we look at things like biomimicry, where the flows of material seen in nature can be emulated in purposeful businesses. And it's about this idea of, the inside of your business, but also your outside, sort of mimicking that, being a purposeful business, and looking locally. That's very much what regeneration is. And the Better Business Act is another idea again, where it's sort of starting on a measure, but we've signed that as a company. And it's about amending Section 172 of the Companies Act, which is the job description for company directors would be to ensure that all businesses align their interests and people and planet alongside profit, so that we're not just talking about profit, where we're looking at, what is the social impact that goes into something and measuring that within the business, and also what goes back to the planet. I think that's really important going forward.
Oh yeah, I definitely feel at the moment, like with the privatized water companies, it's, they're taking huge amounts of profits and putting so little into infrastructure, and it's I think that's sort of being shown more and more as the high end or sort of high level capitalism, just sucking from from everything, from people,
exactly.
from place, from putting nothing back.
Yeah, that's a great example, isn't it? When you're on the beach with nature and you've got sewage coming out, and it's absolutely out there now. You can't deny it. Whereas before they were just trying to paper over the cracks, weren't they? So,
just absorbing the fines as part of their business model is it makes me so angry.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. So, how can we make this change? I do not know. There's people out there lobbying. We're part of Business Declares as well, which is also a sort of movement for change. And we came and did a day at the Extinction Rebellion big one in April, which for a lot of companies, and they've never done anything like that before, and we're very scared about sort of standing outside the energy building. But I think they felt empowered, and it was a space for people to come together, because there's so many people out there that know that change is needed. They might not think that is the right way to do it, but Business Declares was great for sort of bringing people together to do that. And they're now looking at ways of how can we move this forward for change as well. They've just sent out a sort of questionnaire for people that belong to it to see, where can we go? So there's under the radar, there's lots of different things happening. It's just, how can we sort of create this quicker movement now to almost do it right, but to almost lobby the government, perhaps, how can we make them listen to us more? And
yes,
that's the feeling.
It does feel like there's definitely lots of really good things going on. It's quite grassroots, but how do you get the legislation changes which actually force everyone to do the right thing?
Exactly, totally.
I get a lot of emails from people who are kind of excited to make these changes, or I think they're probably in a place that you were in before COVID, in that kind of space of feeling like maybe your work and your ethics weren't quite aligned, but needing that big sort of shift. What advice would you give to people who are in that position?
I would say that they're going to get left behind if they don't change. I mean, we're very much in if you think about the circular economy again, that has to be the way forward, that sort of circular idea of manufacture. The old 20th century linear way of manufacture, make, waste, for example, it just can't carry on, because we're just, building up more and more waste, more and more consumption. So, there's standards that are coming in. There's more things coming in, and hopefully this will happen in the next few years. And if people don't sort of get on that bandwagon, I don't think they're going to exist on to that. They're not going to exist as companies in the future. So I think it's sort of trying to find out the best way of doing things, maybe looking at the carbon, first of all, having a tool or getting a report done and looking at what you can do to make changes there, perhaps. Joining one of these sort of movements so that you're part of like-minded sort of other companies where maybe they might have suggestions to help you as well. It's sort of not trying to do it on your own as well, because it can be lonely, and it can be, but even if you're making tiny little steps, it's a start. But I mean, I would recommend, really, it's a brave, I know, step that we did, but I think the whole of the company really needs to be rethought about, and, everything coming back to sustainability rather than just having it as an add-on. So, so that is the more sort of bigger, revolutionary idea, the braver idea, but that's what I've done.
Yeah, be brave.
Yeah.
So, I mean, circular economy has come up quite a lot in our discussion. I find it hard to be truly circular in the work I do. I know there's lots of, so for instance, I use hemp and wood fiber insulation a lot in my job. All comes wrapped in plastic. There's always like this is brilliant, but yeah, I suppose, is it working, and how do we make it more circular? I know it's either circular or it's not, but more completely circular maybe.
Yeah, and I think again, this is the tough place that we're at the moment, isn't it? It's sort of moving away from this take, make, waste to this, designing out waste and thinking about repurposability in the future. And we're absolutely, we're working with so many different suppliers ourselves when we're building things or making products that you'll then come to oh, well, that's going to ruin my circular process now because, as you say, there's plastic in that, but I think as long as you're sort of starting with that model and trying to work as best as you can and almost looking at each bit of it and sort of, okay, well, this bit at the moment isn't quite right, it isn't circular, but this is a bit that we're working on. When some material comes in or something, then we'll use that instead, and that will make it better. But I think it's just having that mindset shift that this is the way that we want to do things, rather than this, we don't care and we're going to chuck it in waste and not worry about stuff in the future. That's the really important thing to start with. And then, just again, coming back to this sort of, we're on this journey. Don't beat ourselves up too much about it either. We're trying to do our best to make this as best we can circular, but you can't just do things overnight, and there's so many supply chains involved that but I think that's the best advice I would give on that.
You did the Ellen MacArthur Foundation course.
I did, yeah. I looked at various things. There's a guy in Exeter University, it's a professor called Ken Webster, that was doing conversations on it as well. He was great. I had a conversation with him too, but it was sort of just really showing the model that they've done. I mean, I've read books by Donella Meadows. She was also someone that started this whole idea, revolutionary woman, and it's almost Ellen MacArthur's taken the same idea and just given it a different name and moved it on, but they've really brought it out into the forefront, it just sort of made you understand really about how it works. And it's almost not a circle, it's more their sort of picture is more like a butterfly with sort of different like ecosystems coming out of either side. And perhaps that's a better way of sort of talking about it, because as we've already just mentioned, it's very hard to be totally circular. But it's thinking about the carbon, the energy produced. It's thinking about the biomaterials. It's thinking about repurposability in the future. It's thinking about lots of things really, and how we make in a sort of better way than we did through our linear system.
Is there a really good example in a sort of project that you've worked in where you've taken something that was linear and you've substituted for something circular?
Well, we're still sort of doing that at the moment, really, by developing this material that we really will shift us forwards in terms of being circular. We've used other people's sort of materials, perhaps, that were made from waste. We've had lots of samples, for example, like there's a company called Biome that's doing great things with mycelium insulation, things like that they've just brought out this year, which is... So we've used other people's things to help be more circular. We've got samples of like cocoa that they've, used. And we're very much keen to do this sort of thing ourselves and starting to experiment, but trying to do it properly with science behind us. Because, for example, particularly if we're doing something for the kitchen, it's got to be quality and it's got to be durable. There's no point reinventing something that is going to break straight away, or, you also do have to try and decide, is this going to biodegrade in time, or what is going to happen to this when it's repurposed? So you've got lots of criteria that you've got to think about. And you've also got to think about the energy in doing this, because if you're trying to reinvent something, what's the point of using more energy to do something than what is already there? But the fundamental thing comes back to how can we replace fossil fuels, and sort of weighing it back to that as well, which is what I always come back to. So I don't really like using recycled plastic, because it's still made out of fossil fuels at the end of the day, and it's not totally regenerative. Bio is the only way I think that we can solve this problem in the future.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit. It's sort of come up about regeneration versus sustainability. I'm very conscious of this. I've noticed that I sort of realised about episode 10 of the Building Sustainability podcast that sustainability maybe wasn't the best word I could have used. Just quickly, can you describe the principle of regenerative versus sustainable? I can't even say it.
Well, sustainability is almost like I'd mentioned earlier. It's a bit like a sticking plaster. It's about doing less harm, and it's something that, it's almost like adding it onto something. You're not thinking totally about it. You're just, let's see if we can measure the carbon that we're using on a project, or, the energy. That's okay. That's tick that box. And then we move on, and still nothing really changes enough. And it's almost degenerative, really, the sustainable thing. It needs to move on to the regenerative, which is trying to fix everything. It's about the well-being of people and planet coming back to place, reconnecting with nature and restoring ecosystems, reuniting communities. And I love this idea of the local. It's almost, we've got this global mindset, but we're bringing it back to a local idea. It's almost like it's too big for our brains to comprehend all this global stuff. But on a local level, when you look bioregionally at rivers, the way that things are mapped out, we can rebuild. You look at how indigenous communities have looked after these areas for centuries until we started bothering them and ruining what they've done. And they really are the wise people that we need to look to, and perhaps look back at our history. And there was a reason why things were built along rivers, and let's come back. And that's what, everybody's saying now, that let's almost remap how we look at things. And it's not just perhaps coming from a city and looking at it. I'm involved, starting to involved in a donor economics. Kate Rayworth and her donor economics is trying to sort of various initiatives are trying to happen throughout the world. There's been one in Sydney, one in Amsterdam, and we're looking at whether we can do it in Oxfordshire at the moment. And it's very much this thinking of this bioregional idea starting to map even the counties again within Oxfordshire, because you can't say south, west, north. You need to look at the rivers to remap it, and then almost coming out from there, how can we rebuild this, and what are the communities that are within that? May that be a charity or a person or a business, and how can we then work together to sort of rebuild it? And that's what I think regeneration is, looking at the biodiversity as well, and sort of, really working with that, saving it, not just chopping it down and sort of, it's a definite mind shift paradigm, and it's really bigger thinking, thinking more on a sort of subconscious level as well. about moving forward and not, but sustainable is just, as I said, it's almost trying to fix a problem and sort of glue over it, but it's just not going to solve the problem.
That's we can think a little bigger and better, or not necessarily, probably not bigger, just better than that.
And I'm very conscious, you know, I walk with my dog every day and see how the landscape changes. And I think he's been brilliant to almost bring me back to that feeling of place. And I'm very much looking at, I haven't seen so many insects, or, what's the farmers doing as I'm walking around, and sort of really noticing things locally that perhaps I hadn't done before getting that dog even, you know. And I think that's what we need to do more. It's not about flying in a plane to see the culture of, we need to look on our doorstep. Yeah, absolutely.
We've had a really nice thing around here where the neighbouring fields have been left to, they're growing wildflower or harvesting wildflowers, so all the fields aren't getting mown, they're not being grazed off, and the amount of butterflies and just of an evening, the swallows swooping over the fields, obviously gobbling up all of the stuff. And then we had a whole, I think there was 4, I think there might have been kestrels just hunting in our field just at the weekend. And it's, you know, it's a small change of not mowing a space has made like a really big biodiversity impact.
Absolutely.
A very sort of noticeable and easy to quantify one.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen the same thing around here, actually. Yeah. And it's really powerful, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, I really I liked what you said there about the regenerative. I hadn't really expanded my thoughts on regenerative design into the community level. The ability to bring people together, and what actually creating community with a project, how that is regenerative as well.
I think all of it, and it comes back to, this word silo. We've become too, we don't talk to, say, like older generations, or there needs to be more this mixing up again of but through, for example, these community projects, you would perhaps be with people that you'd never thought you would ever talk to, and they've got different ideas and different ways of looking at things. And I think this is what it comes back to, and that's what we've lost, and we need to bring that back again, because everybody has different ideas. We need to be more inclusive, how can we include everyone within this, and build this idea of community. Absolutely.
Yeah. What's exciting you at the moment?
I think so many more biomaterials are coming out that we can use in our projects. This idea of the communities, and the idea that there is so much more collaboration happening. I think this bottom-up idea of how we can make change, almost not waiting for the governments, as businesses and communities and people, we can do this together. And that's what I'm seeing happening. You might not see it reported, but there is things happening behind the scenes. There is, perhaps we are a bit slower in this country. I see so many exciting things happening in Scandinavia, I must admit, with materials and things. I keep looking over there and go, oh, good, they've already looked at that. They've done it. But how can we learn from that as well? And sort of, I think things are moving in the right direction. It's just, how can we sort of accelerate it a bit more, really?
You've mentioned materials there. You've mentioned a few examples. Is there anything that you're sort of championing at the moment, material wise?
Well, mycelium is an amazing material, which I think is going to be used a lot more within projects. And just looking at things like food waste as well, as a waste material is quite exciting. From perhaps using it there's lots of experiments to see where we can go with that. Can we use it as a countertop? Can we? But I'm looking more at materials that we're using that haven't been sort of shipped. So, for example, coffee. Are we always going to be able to get coffee? Maybe if the land heats up so much, we'll have our own coffee here. But as I said, hemp, things like that we can grow locally, and we can almost use the excess off the hemp to make into things. That's what really excites me. How can we? It's this local idea again. How can we build? Make our own. Grow our own materials that we can then use the waste from to make other materials. That really excites me, and how we can cause change and in our interior environments for the better, really.
You mentioned when you were talking about the Oxford, the cottage project, that you'd used a sort of newer plaster on the walls.
We used Adaptivate plaster, which is lime-based. And it allows the walls to breathe, and in old houses that is particularly important. I mean, you can talk more about this than me because I think you've but it's trying not to sort of use cement-based things as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a really good example of a simple substitution that can be made. Swap one bag of plaster for another. Any other sort of materials I love a good material, no doubt, so that's why I'm asking.
I mean, there's interesting things that they're doing with textiles at the moment as well, like denim, using... See, the thing for me is I've got to be careful, is that I don't know what the buyer... So they've got to obviously make the material... So if it's for an interior, not just a furnishing fabric or whatever, they've got to bind it with something to give it strength. I'm just not totally sure if they're using completely vegetable binders or whatever in different things, but they're doing some interesting sort of things with denim, for example, and other waste textiles, which is a huge sort of area that so much landfill of clothes. What can we turn it into instead? And that's certainly something that we can reuse in our local areas as well.
I saw a video of a chap he was sort of pressing denim together with resin and then turning them into frames for glasses and that sort of thing. Is that what you mean? Are you concerned about what that resin might be?
Because you still can't necessarily repurpose it down the line if it's still got some kind of... That's what I'm still not totally, believing in. Well, show me how you can repurpose it then in the future. Yeah. And has it got some element of fossil fuel still in it?
Yes. This
is more the purist thinking here, but I think I'd rather be on that line than not, to be honest.
Oh, completely, yeah. And it's hard to wade through the greenwash.
Exactly.
We use 10% recycled material. We're an eco product. You're not.
No, exactly.
And so, how are you using these sort of principles in your interiors?
Yeah. Well, when we first go into a place, it's almost doing an audit of the space, and even sort of saying to the client, if say they want a whole space looking at, do you actually need to change that to start with? Which is quite a brave move, because
really brave,
you're perhaps not going to be earning as much from it. And then sort of going, well, can we reuse it? Do we have to buy new? Is there something we can do with it? And that's almost the first principle. And then in whether that be a residential or a commercial project. And then, say, for example, we are trying to pioneer to make sort of better kitchens that don't come from China and are made using materials that we can repurpose. We're using a glueless construction because that means that they can be repurposed easier in the future. And that's something that we've sort of been spending quite a lot of time doing. And then looking, when you start peeling away, for example, layers of the kitchen, a lot of it is durable because of the laminate that is put onto the wood. But again, the laminate, how repurposable is that? Once it's stuck onto the wood, you can't really get it off. So that means that that whole piece has to go in landfill in the future. So what materials can we use instead? You know, just constantly thinking about durability. And this is tough. It's sort of, you know, we've done experiments with low VOC paint, and that is, you know, can be a good way because you can touch up things continually as you go forward. So that's something that we do specify, and we're looking at other materials like lino as well at the moment because you can repurpose that as well. But it's quite a complicated subject because you've got so many different parts to a kitchen, like, you know, recyclable feet. Say somebody wanted to move it to another house. How can you do that? How can you make it so that, you know, it could be used for disabled for one person, but then someone else comes in that has different needs? It's thinking about the whole ergonomics and the whole sort of, you know, adaptability of things in the future as well. And that's what we're trying to do. And then you come to the broader interiors, and as I've mentioned, there's a lot of off-gassing that occurs from, for example, sofas that have got flame retardants on the actual fabrics that make them. And so it's educating the client on this kind of thing as well. There's various, you know, we've been lobbying as part of Interior Declares, supporting a lady upholsterer who's been lobbying the government about change, because they're finding that upholsterers are, you know, they're getting absolutely horrible hands. They're really being affected by the chemical treatments that are happening. And there was also something recently to do with mattresses as well, where they're lobbying, and in commercial settings, you have to have Crib 5 standards for mattresses, which is the flame retardancy. And they were finding that after about 7 years that the chemicals either all gone into the humans or they'll have gone out into the atmosphere. So what's the point of using those then? So you've got all these dodgy chemicals that we don't know about within us. So, and our standards are quite different to Europe, and are almost a bit more stringent in some ways. Like, you know, how often do we have candles and use them in our house? So why do we need some of these standards anymore? They're a bit antiquated, really. And, you know, like you on the bottom of a product, for example, you'll have a fire label that's attached to it. People don't realise that it becomes redundant if you take that label off.
Right.
You have to keep that label on it. And a lot of now they've introduced guidelines recently because of the chemicals that they're in. You can't even put your sofa or whatever in landfill anymore. Because so that shows how toxic it is. But yes, we've got them still in our houses. It's crazy. There's so many different ways of re-educating, and it's almost like going through this whole process when you're starting a project with your client, really. And if they make just one of those changes, it's a start.
Yes, I mean, what has become apparent to me as you're talking is that I think people would probably think of interior designers as sort of space makers or place makers, you know, colours and objects and shapes. And actually what's needed, and same as in building, it's a deep knowledge of what the material actually is and what it's doing. So not just looks.
Totally, yeah. I mean, it's the spatial, it's the ergonomics, which I think people neglect too much, and there is this whole sort of disparity about, well, what is an interior designer? We're not interior decorator is one thing, but an interior designer is also thinking about the needs of the person in the space. And this well-being idea is, I think, what needs to become forefront, is that we're thinking about the well-being of the person in the space. And that means, as you say, well, what are those products and what are they made from, and how are they going to better the person in the space in the future? And then looking at the light, the air, the natural conditions, and how you can use technology as well to sort of work with it. But yeah, lots of different things. And also, obviously, biophilia is huge.
Which is the buzzword of the podcast for the last couple of years.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it's been fantastic to hear from you. I've found it incredibly inspiring and really hopeful. Actually, I've had a few months of being a bit overwhelmed by things, and feeling, pretty beaten by a lot of sort of news stories and the weather.
Absolutely, I feel the same. But I think that's why it's important that we get into these spaces more with like-minded people and take stock actually of what is happening. And I think that's the only thing we can do really to try and we, I've got children. I don't know if you have, but I have, and I can't not do anything when I think about their future. I've got to try and do all I can, because that's the only way we move forward. By sticking our heads in the sand, go, oh well, stuff it, who cares anyway. I just think that's tragic. As designers, I've always been a designer. I think we've got a responsibility because we are always the innovators and the people that cause change at the front. Now is our chance, because we've been neglected. This will send me on my whole designer bandwagon, but creativity is always, it's always about science. And we are the thinkers that think creatively, and we are so needed now. They're saying that as number 17 as a role, design is now coming to be wanted to number 3, to work with science to make change. So brilliant! Finally, we've got a voice.
Well, you said number 17,
sort of ranked as an industry. Yeah, it's quite low down. Not really seen as an important, an important thing.
I had no idea that we'd been ranked.
Oh yes,
like
of course. That's why who they give funding to and who they don't.
Of course, yes. Oh well, yeah. Number 3 is where we want to be, though.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for Helen for making the time to talk with me. I certainly hope that you are feeling inspired at the ways you can take your work and projects. I know I certainly am. There is a whole load of links to the stuff we've talked about. That is Kite Creative, What is a Purposeful Business, Edward Bulmer Paint, the Glastonbury Waste Bench, Planted, Kintsugi, First Planet, 2050 Materials, Cradle to Cradle, B Corp, the Better Business Act, Business Declares, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. In the episode, I called her Ellen McCarthy. Apologies for that. Yeah, lots of other bits for you to check out, as well as an event link for that Windows conference with Marianne Sir. If this was your first episode, then please do subscribe and don't miss any future episodes. And have a look back through the other 102 episodes. I think if this episode was your thing, then definitely check out episode 65 with Rachel Fowler, How to Make Our Interior Space Healthy and Sustainable. And if you did enjoy this episode, then please take 2 seconds and just share the episode to your favourite social media, stick it in a newsletter, or just tell someone at a social gathering that they should listen. And then make sure you stand over them and wait for them to find it on their phone and subscribe so that they don't forget. And finally, if you do find this podcast useful or entertaining, then please do consider supporting via Patreon if you can afford it. There's a link in the show notes. It helps me out. And you get loads more nuggets of information from the guests. And that includes 5 minutes extra from Helen. Okay, that's all from me. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are safe and well. Until next time, bye-bye.